All right. Welcome, Todd. I'm Garrett Seville. Um, my introduction is I'm a double major, political science and history at the University of California, Riverside. Um, and I'm just looking a little bit more to learn about you and your company and your job role and basically what your day-to-day looks like. So first question I have for you is, would you briefly do like an introduction and then start to describe like your job role, what it entails?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you. Thanks to Ron for involving me. It's good to meet you virtually.
Likewise.
So, thank you. So, I'm Todd Radom. I am a designer and brand consultant that has worked in the sports industry for just about 30 years now. And design for sports, when I started working in it, was a very nascent field. It has exploded, I would say, within the last 10 years or so. My body of work includes the official logos for Super Bowls, multiple kinds of all-star games, and the World Baseball Classic, big events. I've designed the visual identities for teams, for entire leagues. And yeah, and I'm also an author. I have written two books, Winning Ugly, which is my loving homage to, and I'm going to use air quotes here, the most interesting uniforms in the history of Major League Baseball. A lot of history in there. And then I'm co-author of the book Fabric of the Game, which explores the origin stories behind the names of every NHL team, as well as their looks. And so, it's been a long career, and I've kind of, navigated into different places. And just to sum it up, I've worked with every professional league in North America, a number of teams, and it's been an interesting journey.
That's crazy. When you like think back of like logos and teams, like just curious, what stood out the most? Like, because thinking about logos, like I can tell you major sports team logos. I know the Super Bowl logo usually has a Roman numeral in it. Like, what exactly, what have you like seen that's just been like, wow, like
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
knocked you off your
all
feet?
right. I mean, and again, being a student of history, and before you hit record, we hashed out this a little bit. But
Yeah.
first of all, I would say I come from a family of artists. So I've always looked at things maybe a little bit differently with an artistic, aesthetic eye. And I was one of these kids that never necessarily, was a good athlete at all. And but I always observed the aesthetics of sports. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about, uniforms. I'm talking about logos and how these logos are applied, not only on stuff, on baseball caps or T-shirts, but in the context of a stadium experience, this kind of thing. So to answer your question, um, how logos and visual identities are applied has really, really changed. When I first started working in pro sports in the early '90s, it's a time of great experimentation. First of all, you think about what new logos looked like back then. A slew of expansion teams that were all kind of purple, black, teal, silver, right? Very, very trend driven. We
Yeah.
stepped away back to basics. But the work gets applied in just a staggering number of ways. If we think about an in-stadium or in-arena fan experience, think about how our logos are displayed on scoreboards and how they move and the scale of these things. They get big, they get small. And anytime I talk about this stuff, I consider the fact that when I first started out all those years ago, our biggest consideration was, how does a logo translate to just being black and white, and what does it look like on a fax cover sheet, right? So
Yeah.
the criteria have changed, especially with high definition broadcasting and with the mobile experience.
Yeah. When you look at like, so how many logos does every team has? Like two, three logos, right?
Yeah, ideally, I always talk about the fact that think about a typical team will have a suite of assets as their brand identity.
Yeah.
Okay. And usually it will entail a primary logo and then a series of usefully a couple of secondary logos or abbreviated marks, and then maybe some team lettering. In the case of baseball, you might have a headwear mark, a cap logo. So it's really kind of, I always look at it as kind of a Swiss Army knife, right? Where it's a
Yeah.
whole series of tools that fold up into one very useful tool.
Gotcha. So I'm not super familiar with like a lot of team logos. So I'm a Bears fan for football. So I know there's the classic C, the secondary logo's the bear logo, and then there's like this new, like the B, if you're familiar with that one.
Yep.
That Mark Trestman always wore on his hat in those games, if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Yeah. So
the NFL, to your point, and the Bears in particular being a very traditional franchise, one that has never really changed their look, but they've added on to it and they've kind of painted on the edges a little bit. But the Bears are one of the most time-honored looks in professional sports, and they should probably never change. So how do you advance into how do you appeal to younger fans? You start to incorporate some new stuff that is subservient, if you will, to the time-honored identity. And real quick, NFL teams are weird because you think about the uniform of an NFL team, it is, for the most part, just numbers, right? And the Bears do have those very proprietary number forms that they've worn forever, right?
Yeah.
But the logo is on the helmet. And in the case of a team like the Cleveland Browns, they don't even have a logo. Very unusual case.
Or then the Vikings or the Jaguars the Vikings have the horns on the side, and then I think the Jaguars have the spots of a Jaguar, maybe just the Jaguars logo.
Yeah, and actually, Garrett, those are two teams that have evolved slightly over the last decade or so. The Vikings kind of, their Viking horn they've worn on their helmets since their inception in 1961, but they kind of redrew it a little bit, beefed it up, added a little bit more detail, and the Jaguars have pivoted a little bit and they've changed their uniforms over the years. But NFL teams, again, are a little bit strange. Some teams really have a license to burn their look to the ground and start from scratch. Other teams have to add on, a la the Bears.
Gotcha. So looking back at the questions, what's been one of your greatest highlights of your career? Something you're most proud of, something that you found just like best represents Todd?
It's a great question. I got a couple, because you can't say just one, given the long time there. So I always say that having created and navigated my way through the process of creating a Super Bowl logo back in the days when they were unique, that they weren't standardized like they are now, is a significant career accomplishment. And of course, we all know, the Super Bowl is the biggest one-day sporting event on the face of the earth. The visibility and the ways that this thing is deployed, that's a great one. I got a couple of other interesting ones, hopefully real quick. Starting in 2017, I worked with the entertainment mogul, actor, rapper Ice Cube in creating the Big Three League, 3-on-3 basketball.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, and so I am responsible for everything visual on the court in that league. I created the design of the court, design of the ball, every team uniform, every team logo, the look of the trophy. So it's a very immersive experience. And
that's crazy.
And he's been a great creative partner. So it's a little bit of a different thing, like so many things, being in on something from the ground floor up, creating something from scratch with no guardrails whatsoever. It's a really cool creative challenge.
Yeah, because I remember they had like the three-headed monsters. Obviously, you probably remember making every single one of these logos, but like there was like the cases, the yellow horn or the yellow jackets, something.
Killer threes.
Killer threes.
Monsters, a lot of three puns here. Tri-state, and then 4 expansion teams. The league lost 2020 to the pandemic. But the prior season, 2019, 4 new teams. And it was an interesting challenge to kind of, each of these should look like, themselves. They should look individual. And the weird thing about the Big Three is the fact that these teams are not based in cities. It's a traveling league. So yeah, it's a really cool, ongoing, interesting project, and we're ramping up for 2021, which again, taking a year off, especially with a newer league, created some challenges. Yeah, I'm happy to be back on it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to like when I would watch that, like that first season with like Scalabrine, Kwame Brown, player coach Allen Iverson.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, and I was there for the very first game. I sat underneath the basket at Barclays Center in Brooklyn, and sold out crowd, 16,000, something like that. And I looked catty corner to Ice Cube, and we looked at each other and went like this, both of us, like, can't believe it actually happened, because it happened in a big hurry. And optically, it's a very rich league. The broadcast presentation is really cool, which makes sense. The people that run the league are entertainment people first, kind of sports people second in a certain way. So anyway, coming back strong for 2021 with some new twists.
Alrighty. So you obviously, this sounds like a lot of like graphic design or then physical design. Like, what kind of like skills have been most useful for that? Like, did you get like your education in some form of creative artistic
Yeah,
form?
absolutely. I mean, so as I said, I come from a family of artists, gives me a little bit of a leg up in terms of looking at the arts, applied arts, whatever it is, as a practical career. So I'm very fortunate. But I went to School of Visual Arts in New York City, 4 years. I was a graphic design major. I'm the chairman of the board of the Alumni Society at SVA. So I've been very involved in all those years since then, and it's a long time ago. But when I learned graphic design as a profession, it was done, it was pre-digital. It was basically arts and crafts, drawing skills, inking, old school layout. So it was a very tactile thing. And all that changed, I would say, maybe 6 or 7 years into my career. So I really feel lucky that I've spanned both of these worlds. But working in sports, of course, involves, looking at this work and how it's deployed in so many ways, dimensionally, on broadcast, on product, all kinds of different stuff. It's not just static. It's not designing something and, looking at a printed page. So it's always changing. I will also say that I've worked by myself, for myself, for 30 years now.
Wow.
I do collaborate with partners and, of course, clients. So it's a little bit different, but it's been a different kind of journey.
That's really interesting. So you've never had any like staff or
No.
anything? That's
No,
crazy.
I'm a control freak. I'm a total. I describe myself, especially, there aren't a lot of. I'm getting into my late 50s here, so there aren't a lot of designers, working designers, who are still kind of doing it all the way that I am. And I do some consulting stuff too. But I still describe myself as the guy who loves getting, popping open the hood of the car, getting in there and taking the engine out and doing stuff and putting it back together. That
no
kind
instructions. Just doing it yourself.
Right. And I'm also an illustrator, a typographer. I do lettering design. So I've never really, always kind of like fought off attempts to pen myself into a certain job description.
Yeah. When you were growing up, did you think sports was in your future, or was it more like art and then see where that takes you?
Yeah, it was art. I think, I wasn't quite sure what I would do without going to art school. Honestly, I was a kid who enjoyed history, and who knows, to become a teacher or something like that. But I think it was the great bluesman John Lee Hooker talking. He said, if it's in you, it's got to come out, and it came out. So I went to School of Visual Arts, graduated into an iffy economy, nothing like today. Nothing is like today. But I worked in book publishing, designing book covers for several years. And book covers are a great challenge to a designer, because they've got, a little bit of everything. There's illustration or photography, there's typography, It's got a sell at retail. Of course, it's a little different with Amazon. It's almost like little posters. And every designer that I've ever encountered loves to do posters because they're just, lush and very expressive.
Yeah.
So that, and I was the guy who an in-house art department got sports books. Give it to Todd. He's a sports fan. Give the baseball books to Todd. He'll get it.
Yeah.
And I built up quite a portfolio of these things. And when it came time to go off on my own, I had a good, a good portfolio of sports related stuff.
Wow. Was there like any athlete or team or something that kind of pushed you along the way? Any like athlete you admire that like maybe has pushed you into the sports world a little more, or someone's
Well,
work ethic?
yeah, I mean, it's, part of the cool thing about what I do is that, again, I deal with a range of leagues, teams, sometimes athletes. I've got several people who I would point out that I admire. I'll give you a couple that I don't know, but I enjoy who they are and what they do for society. I think of a player like J.J. Watt, for instance, right? He's changing
Wow.
teams.
Yeah.
But his commitment to community is, inspiring to anyone. And
Unmatched.
part of being a creative person is being inspired, right?
Yeah.
I think of Colin Kaepernick, someone who literally, the
Super
trajectory,
change.
trajectory of his life and career was altered by his sticking by his principles and beliefs. I will point out somebody I know, Dave Winfield, Baseball Hall of Famer, who, if I'm not mistaken, had the first charitable foundation of a professional athlete back in the early 1970s. So great guy,
Yeah.
inquisitive guy. We're inspired by people who get back, who think a little bit differently. One other one I'll point out, I like Sean Doolittle, now on the Cincinnati Reds, guy who speaks truth to power in a lot of ways, and is involved with all kinds of interesting stuff. So,
All righty. Let me see, because I want to build off that topic. Like, so you said, was it Winfield?
Hey, Winfield. Oh,
So he was like the trailblazer to like charitable giving back to the community in baseball.
yeah, Dave Winfield. Dave Winfield was drafted in 3 different sports by 4 different teams.
Wow.
Okay. And he made it to first round draft pick of the San Diego Padres in the early 1970s. Never played a game in the minor leagues, went straight to the majors as a young man.
Wow.
And in San Diego, he would invite kids from the community. I think in many cases, kids from not great circumstances, perhaps, to sit in, I think, Winfield Pavilion. And so he would buy blocks of tickets and kids would come on out. And this was really unheard of, especially for a very young athlete, a guy in his early 20s, to be doing that at that time. And that's a pretty cool story. And Dave always has handled himself well, built up a Hall of Fame career as a baseball player, but, got drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL, got drafted in basketball by 2 different leagues.
Wow.
Really just endlessly fascinating guy, and continues to be for me. He works for the Major League Baseball Players Association these days.
Okay. Yeah. Now I was gonna say most athletes have some sort of foundation where they give back to their hometown, and I guess he kind of paved the way for that. If that's exactly what you're saying, which is super cool. I mean, every player has their own branded like community service event now, which I think is a big underestimated thing when you think about sports. You think that all these athletes just want to make money and live in their mansions and drive sports cars, but they're also putting together like big foundation, fundraising, charity all the time.
Yeah, I mean, the power of celebrity in our culture can be ugly at times. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Hero worship in any form is not necessarily a great thing. But you look at a very prominent player like LeBron James, who has funded a school, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
I mean, giving back. And again, I think it's one of these deals that with great responsibility, great power, great responsibilities
The
are also.
Spider-Man quote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and not everybody handles that well, but the ones who do can really make a difference. And I think in a lot of ways, you look at athlete activism. Teams have taken their cues, right? No matter where you stand on anything. The fact that athletes were being outspoken led teams to open up their arenas and stadiums to voting, to vaccinations now,
Yeah.
right? Being part of the community, not just necessarily taking money. So, it's a pretty cool thing.
Another question that I had was, is there anything you'd do differently? Not necessarily a regret, because I don't like regret. That doesn't sound like a word that sounds like progress, but like anything you might do differently. Something that you wish you had done sooner, or maybe just differently. Something that didn't go in your path the way you thought.
Yeah, I mean, hindsight, to your point, is 2020, and
Yeah.
especially creative career, creativity is full of so many failures. I always say, like, we've got a mountain of failures that each little success is buried under. So I don't know. I mean, I think you think about this stuff. I, I'm at somewhat of a loss because I do think that everybody's journey is individual and it's sometimes haphazard. There's a lot of imperfections along the way, and it's kind of funny because I'm a designer, but I don't have a designed life necessarily.
Yeah.
But you know, I think that I've always tried to keep up with my technical skills, with my relationships, which are hugely important working in sports, right?
Yeah.
So I had to think about it. Nothing comes to mind, which is not to say that I'm perfect, but it is to say that it's been a meandering path. And honestly, the people I value most in life and in relationships have had kind of a meandering path.
Yeah. I like that idea. Yeah. I mean, it's true. Not every path is straightforward. There's a lot of twists and turns, and you never know where you're gonna end up.
Yeah, yeah, and it can be rewarding and interesting.
So obviously we're doing this interview in preparation of the sports panel conference sports industry showcase. Do you have any advice or words for any of the college students that are attending this? Just kind of words of encouragement, maybe some guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, my path has been an individual one, so it's a little bit different. But here's what I would say. The people that I know, just everybody who works in sports, there is an energy and a prominence attached to it that is like nothing else. I always think of the work that I've done. To see somebody tattoo a logo that I've done on their body, I'm not going to get that working in financial services, or no disrespect to that.
No, of
So
course. It's different. Yeah. No,
tap into
that's
that
completely
passion.
amazing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it is incredibly hard work because people work in sports, especially for teams, are generally underpaid, overworked, sleep on couches in non-COVID times, all this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
just hang in there and feed off the excitement, feed off each other because you're kind of a fraternity or sorority. Couple of other things. Be inquisitive about the business of sports. It's helped me tremendously. It actually led me into doing what I'm doing, reading about the nascent sports licensing business back in the early 90s, led me to working in sports design, and here I am all these years later. So be inquisitive about everything, be inspired if possible, but just getting that foot in the door and networking, keeping up your relationships, and I think really importantly, embracing diversity, especially in sports, is really, really important. On the design side, when I started out doing it, it was guys who look like me, same age, and now it is incredibly diverse. And I think it makes my work better and makes us all better.
Yeah. Well, that concludes all the questions I have for you. This interview probably went a little longer than expected, but thank you so much for your time. Do you have any closing remarks or anything you want to say?
No, except to say thank you, Garrett. Good questions. Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Good
meet you.
luck. Keep in touch. hit me on LinkedIn, and that would apply to, everybody that's going to hear it. Not on there necessarily a lot, but again, relationships are important. They really matter. And I think we've all discovered that now more than ever, especially over the past year. So be healthy, be well, good luck, and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.